Welcome to ALC Chats, a podcast series developed and produced by the Ageless Living Collaborative. I'm Phoebe Stein, president of Olive Presents and co-founder of the Ageless Living Collaborative. Ageless Living Collaborative is dedicated to optimizing the lives of seniors and giving them the information and tools to live their best lives. The mission of ALC is to listen, educate, inspire, and influence positive change for seniors and those who support the aging community. ALC Chats is another platform to reach those interested in supporting seniors, be it in senior living or aging in place. ALC Chats comes to you as a podcast and in some cases a vodcast. You can find ALC content on our website, www.agelesslivingcollaborative.org, or by following us on social media channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and on our own YouTube channel. Whichever place you follow us, we're happy you've chosen to join us. And now, we welcome our featured guest. We are excited to be here today with Dave Bailey and Brittany Wells from Shaw Contract, and we're going to talk about a really exciting study that was commissioned by Shaw several years ago in coordination with the University of Georgia. And we're going to talk about the eye, which is probably one of the most important things we can talk about when it comes to senior living and the aging process, because our eyes are what does age chronologically. So I want to talk a little bit about why this is important. We know that poor sensory function is associated with increased risks of accidents, mortality, and poor quality of life, particularly in older adults. So the built environment can be adapted to accommodate for age-related sensory change. So today we're going to talk about that change and what we can do to facilitate a healthier, better life for our seniors. So, Dave and Brittany, I know you're going to go back and forth on this with me. So, who would like to explain the physiological changes that occur in the eye as we age?
Thank you, Phoebe, for setting us up here. And, this white paper, it includes so much information truly about the anatomy of our eyes and how it changes as we age, because that's inevitable. We're all going to age. And there is a difference between, age-related illness and disease. So we'll touch on a little bit of that. But just some of the things that physiologically will change in our eye as we age that can affect vision is the eye loses flexibility. So the lens actually loses flexibility, and that does turn into presbyopia. And that is what makes you have to use reading glasses. So starts around middle age, all of us, starting around 40-ish usually.
That is the barometer, isn't it? Oh, you've turned 40. Have you gotten your cheaters yet?
So that's one of the big ones that people really notice early on. There's others, tear film and your cornea, those change. So you produce less liquid. That leads to dry eye symptoms. You have to blink a little bit more. You might be going and getting some eye drops to help you out. Your lens, it's crystalline lens. So that becomes more rigid, less transparent, can lead to presbyopia or just decreased vision and glare that is cataracts. So lots of things. You lose, your photo sensors. So that is just change in contrast, change in dark adaptation, change in color. So there's a lot of just changes that happens to your eye, and it doesn't start that late in age for us. And it definitely changes the way that you interact with your built environment.
I do think that it's a bit comical. We see so many commercials now for every disease, condition, be it the eye or any other part of the body. And with the eye-related pharmaceuticals, we mostly see seniors in it. But to your point, the process really does start deteriorating around 40. And I often think, well, they should put some younger folks in there because they're impacted too. It's not just 0 to cataract surgery. It's like 0 to 40 and then 40 to the point where there's cataract surgery and some of these other conditions come into play. So maybe we can influence that a little.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, how do the changes in visual acuity and contrast sensitivity, as well as those with color perception, affect an adult's daily activities? What's changing? Where do you see the most impact?
So there is a lot to unpack. I mean, there's so much that can be impacted. And again, it's a little bit with illness, maybe a little bit with disease. So just a few of them, cataracts, for instance, it cause clouding of the lens. You get blurred vision, increased sensitivity to glare, so that can impact your ability to drive at night. So that's a big one. Glaucoma, that is a disease, but it is very prevalent, or one of the most common. That can affect your peripheral vision because it's damaged by that optic nerve. So you get tunnel vision. So that's going to mess a little bit with your brain because your brain and your eyesight is so tied. It actually says in this study that almost 50% of your brain is used and focused on your vision and your eyesight.
Wow.
So it's massive what your brain is doing to take all of what your eye is seeing and translate that into how we live. Other big things that I key are just daily. When you walk into a dark room from a light space, or when you walk in the house after being in the daylight, it's a summer, beautiful day, you walk in your house, you have dim light. It's going to take a really long time for your eyes to switch over. You may trip, fall, bump into furniture that has a very similar color to your floor or to your wall because you're not able to change.
Make that adjustment.
Yeah, the dark adaptation is much slower. And you can notice that, from the time that you were 20 to, again, the time you're 40, that's going to change to the time that you're 60 and beyond. So having that bright color in your house is important because you're not going to be able to see all that dark. And then one big one as well is just the contrast. And we talk about this a lot in design. Again, not having similar colors everywhere because you're not going to be able to differentiate, maybe what's a wall color versus a floor color versus a furniture color. You're losing the ability for your eye to see as much of that contrast. So you really have to heighten that up.
So the white room is not your friend.
The white room is not your friend. A black room is also not your friend. You really have to think about, okay, what can I see if my eyesight is not 100% there? If I am a person designing, I turn off a light, turn it back on. What am I having to get used to be able to see?
And some people actually get dizzy from that extreme from dark to light and vice versa. So if you walk into the dark, it's a little bit unsettling to your brain that, what are you going into?
Yeah.
So does the study address the idea or the notion of adding texture as points of differentiation? I'm just curious because I know you don't want all of dark or all of light and you want some variance, but does it indicate that there should be increased texture in design?
Texture can help, especially if it's in, areas where you're going to be feeling for something. It can actually be the opposite of beneficial if you're thinking about flooring. Because now you're going from maybe a light room to a dark room. You can't fully see it. You don't notice a texture change in your floor. You don't have a high contrast differentiation there. So there is a level of texture being good. That would be like furniture. It could be, wall covering. It could be things like that. But if they're not going to be directly looking at it or be able to see it because it's too far, it may not be helpful in those cases.
And another interesting contributor to vision loss or vision adjustment, because it's not always loss, but it's seeing things differently, can be when somebody is on medication, and medication affects their eyesight. It might depreciate the eye value. Um, what are some other sensory declines that were talked about in this study? Does it affect hearing? Is there a correlation between vision loss and hearing loss, or vision loss and balance? I personally think that the vision to balance ratio is really important, because I do feel that adjustment necessary in balance when I go from dark to light to dark. So I'm curious about these other sensory declines.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really shocking. Um, Again, vision, your brain focuses so much on what you're able to see and what you're able to perceive. Now, we do see when eyesight deteriorates, sometimes other things are heightened, but what we see across a greater percentage is that if you are losing or your eyesight is changing, it can also affect the way that you perceive your hearing or your balance. And that is, your senses are just inextricably connected in that way. So you may see that if someone is starting to not be able to see, they also may be saying, I can't hear you. And it's not because maybe they actually can't hear you. It's because they aren't having all of the senses work together like they used to. They're not able to read your lips like they used to be able to. They're not able to see maybe all of your body language and your facial expressions. So the way they perceive hearing is just different.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, why did Shaw feel it was important to commission a study such as this, and work with UGA to learn more about how the eye impacts the aging process and abilities of seniors, not only to see things, but to ferret them out, whether it's feeling their way texturally or light and dark? Why was that important to Shaw? And how does that impact the flooring side of things?
That's a great point, Phoebe. And as manufacturers, we're designing products for our customers, which are designers or the communities. And at the end level, it is the resident and the older adult that is living on top of the floor. But it's really important, for us to not only design as we manufacture, but for us to put out product that our designers can utilize to create spaces that really support aging adults. And we have been for so long going off of potentially misconceptions, assumptions, history knowledge on what, flooring finishes can do in terms of the built environment and how we need to support. But what we didn't know is the hard research. So that's when we really, we reached out to UGA, their school of gerontology. They pulled together all of this research that existed at different ends of the web, and we're able to kind of pull it together to give not only, again, us insight into how we can better design products to support these spaces, but also to share this with our customers so they can create, the built environment that is going to be supporting the residents, as we want them to continue living and supporting their dignity and safety as they are moving throughout life, whether aging in place or moving into a community.
I
Well
think it's
said, Brittany.
fantastic. That's just fantastic. I'm so glad that you guys have commissioned this study and that you now have the results of it, because I think you articulated perfectly what everybody's concern is. We've gone with so much conjecture over time. Oh, yeah, you can't have the floor too shiny. Okay, we've got that. We figured that out. It was kind of trial and error. And we figured out that you can't have patterns in carpet that might look like snakes. Okay, nobody wants to walk into snakes or big dark blotches that make them feel like they're falling into a well. So we figured all that out. It was trial and error, but I'm so glad that you really went a lot deeper and got the study, and really have science behind us now on what's going to be better for aging adults and at different phases, because they do need different types of flooring at different stages of the aging process. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that. And we'll start with, tell us what is crucial to consider in the built environment when you're designing spaces for older adults. Now that you have this new information, what rises to the top?
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. And it's also important, as Brittany was talking earlier, it's important to consider how vision interacts with other senses. And as our sensory systems decline, we rely more heavily on visual cues to compensate for losses in hearing and or balance. So the flip side of that is enhancing visual clarity can actually indirectly support other sensory functions, which give us a more holistic approach to safety and comfort. One of the coolest things I learned in reading this study from UGA was an example they gave where you know as we age, we may experience a diminished sense of taste and smell. And they gave the example of how we might refuse to eat healthy foods because tomatoes taste less tomatoey. But the study suggests that if you adjust the lighting to make the tomatoes look more appealing, it will actually make them taste better as well. Because it's about this shared sense of perception,
Right.
and the way our minds work, that our senses just don't work independently of one another. And so then incorporating these types of considerations into the design of living spaces, the built environment, we can not only enhance safety, but we can also promote a sense of independence and well-being, and really enhance the way we're perceiving this environment that we're living in.
That's fantastic. And also really interesting because we know that the senior palate changes much like the eye. Um, the taste buds are lost on a daily basis, which is just shocking and terrifying to think, but it's true. And so we have to adjust the way we season foods and the way we make them interesting to older adults, because one of the challenges is to ensure that people are eating and eating healthy. And so the fact that the study also addresses how light has an influence on food and somebody's appetite and their willingness to eat something and then it tastes right to them is another amazing element to the study. I do want to make a note that this study will be up on the Ageless Living Collaborative website under white papers. We will have it posted there if you'd like to read the entirety of the study from UGA. It will be on the agelesslivingcollaborative.org website. Tell me, how does color and how do contrasting patterns in flooring influence the way a senior might navigate safely? Um, you know, what I briefly addressed the snake idea and the
Mhm.
falling through the well, but there's so many other things about color contrast and patterns and flooring that you all know is either a no-no or it's something that encourages safe travel across that flooring. Could you go into that a little bit and let us know what the research shared on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with contrast, and really a good practice, and it's supported by the study, is to make sure you have contrast to help people see changes in plane. So a simple one is floor to wall. You don't want your floor to be the same color as your wall. You want to create that contrast so that your floor, there's a clear indication that, hey, there's a change in plane here. And while the floor to wall example is obvious, stairs are maybe a little less obvious, where you absolutely want to use contrast to indicate a change in elevation in that floor surface. But contrast can also be a hazard where it's used without a change in elevation. In other words, you don't want to make such a contrasting change in flooring surfaces in the pattern of the floor, because it might make it look like a step.
Right, right, right.
So if it's a step, use that contrast, highlight the hazard. But if there is no step, there is no hazard, you certainly don't want your flooring to have a contrasting line that would indicate a step.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also begs the question about when people do designs within a floor and they are in different colors. And the optical illusion of that is often, oh, there must be a step down, but it's not. So we want to stay away from that. Okay, very good. Well, it makes perfect sense to me.
And I think that's why we don't see a lot of linear, like geometric, wild geometric patterns that we might see in some other building types, other segments, because commonly to get those, really geometric patterns to pop, you're using a lot of contrast,
Right.
which is not what we want here.
And I think, just to add on that, the hospitality trend, we want to bring that element of hospitality to senior communities. And so that's one of the things that we've seen is you want to bring in those big, bold patterns. You want to add in all of that design. But how do we do that in a way that limits the contrast, or we can use this research to just edit a little bit to make it easier for the aging eye and those to be able to see and increase the safety of the space at the same time.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, I think about shiny, long, monotonous hallways in healthcare facilities and how those are really a hazard for anybody who's got, an aging eye. I see people tripping on them. And I think to myself, well, here we are in a hospital. I guess it's a good thing they're already in the hospital. But there's got to be a way to break that up for flooring in healthcare facilities too. I think they could really benefit from reading this study.
Agreed.
We might want to share that with them a little bit. What are some of the flooring materials that can be utilized to ensure that people don't slip and that minimize fall potential? We kind of think of, okay, there's carpet and there's, either, LVT or hardwood or vinyl flooring, but what are the recommended flooring materials to minimize slips and falls and that type of thing?
Well, we can start with shiny floors, since you just mentioned them. Shiny floors look slippery, and specifically gloss. So when you're looking at hard surface flooring, you want to be using products that have a low gloss that don't look slippery. It's so strange that when we expect to step on something, we're expecting to step on something that's slippery, and it's not. It can cause you to stutter. So there's a risk there, not only of slips if the floor is slippery, high gloss, but if it's glossy and not slippery, it could actually cause someone to stutter and trip. So it can be a hazard. So gloss level, look for low gloss, hard surfaces. Carpet is wonderful from a slip resistance standpoint. Low pile carpet is easy to walk on. It gives people great traction, and it's not going to be as slippery, if you will. as
Mhm.
many hard surfaces, even though there are hard surface products in the industry that incorporate some grit into them that provide some slip resistance. It would be wonderful in bathrooms or any area that could experience infrequent contamination, spills, areas around the water fountain.
Mhm. You know,
Another one. Oh,
a lot of seniors wear footwear that is kind of an anti-slip footwear, whether it's an athletic shoe or a rubberized sole. And oftentimes they scuff and they kind of trip from too much grip. What's the great antidote to that?
to stick with, it's a tough question to answer because you don't want floors that are slippery, but you
Right.
absolutely don't want floors that are too sticky, too aggressive.
Mhm.
And while I think the jury's still out from a official opinion standpoint, nobody seems to want to really um, come out with a number. The ADA guidelines are wonderful for accessible routes, which recommend a coefficient of friction of point five or greater.
Mhm.
And it seems to be working really well. That level of friction enables people to walk around safely. It's not slippery. And then those same guidelines, although I think they removed this part of it for ramps, they would recommend like a point 0.8. And I think that's also good guidance. So for normal accessible flat routes, I think if you're in the range of point 0.6 to point 0.8, you're going to be um, comfortable
Right.
from a walking
Okay.
standpoint, and it's not going to be too aggressive.
Okay. That's great. That's great. Because, you walk around senior living communities and you see people, and not that long ago, everybody wasn't wearing athletic shoes, right? They were wearing, leather soled shoes, but that's kind of gone by the wayside in many situations. And so I wonder how the flooring has to adjust to the footwear, which is kind of a funny thing to think about, but it's a real concern because they have to kind of mesh up.
It is, and fun fact for our listeners, the ASTM test for coefficient of friction still prescribes the use of a leather shoe foot. Even though the world has really, most of us have moved on to rubber-soled shoes, and a lot of manufacturers do additional testing with rubber, simulated rubber feet on that test to recognize the changes in footwear.
Hmm. Well, that makes sense. It would not make sense for them to ignore that because it's really a society change. You know,
Mhm.
Footwear has changed, and so the flooring, since we're walking on flooring all the time, has to adjust for that safety. I'm really glad to know that they have different tests that they can run for that, and I bet nobody really thinks about it on a daily basis except for our designers and, of course, the floor manufacturers, thank goodness. Um, how can these flooring materials be selected for each application within, say, a community? So, aging in place is one thing, and you have more of a continuous flooring throughout a house. And you'll have a different flooring in the kitchen and in the bathrooms. But what happens in community? Where do those flooring elements change through community? And how are they selected for optimizing safety throughout the community?
We would follow a lot of the same rules. Glare and reflectiveness is one. Use low gloss, hard surfaces. Many today have a matte finish, but there are still some high gloss products out there. And we always love to caution designers and particularly owners of communities that maintenance is important, specifically the application or not application of floor polish. Many high performance resilient flooring products are in the market today that don't require polish. A lot of them can be polished, but you're buying a beautiful low gloss product that is perfect for residents, and we don't encourage you to put a high gloss polish on it. So that is one. And we didn't talk about transitions, so maybe like to talk a little about those. Uh,
Absolutely.
I think we all know transitions are not great, and while they might be acceptable in your typical multifamily application, and even when I'm presenting on ADA compliance, I always talk about ADA compliance, and the ADA guidelines have done wonderful things for us from an accessibility standpoint. But I also will talk about ADA friendliness, where you might be able to find an ADA compliant transition, but oftentimes there's other options that are much more comfortable, less bump, more of a ramp. But I think when we're talking about senior living, we really want no transition, and I know a lot of designers do. So it's really, I think a lot of the onus is on manufacturers to create and present floor and finish options that eliminate the need for transitions. Like one common example is 5 millimeter LVT to carpet tile. A situation where, we've been able to successfully as an industry remove the need for a transition there. And so I think just thoughtful planning of the types of finishes that are being used, and sometimes you can't avoid a change in elevation. There are wonderful things that floor installers and mechanics can do to ramp up the subfloor, to essentially ramp one finish up to another in a very gradual manner that, again, eliminates the need for a transition strip.
Nice. Yeah, those strips were never a great idea. It seems like they tended to create a fall situation because people would step their toes on them or they'd lift at some point. I think that those are never ideal.
And a good note on the transition too is if you have to have one, based on this research, I think for so long we've thought, okay, if we have it matching, right, that would at least help from an aesthetic perspective. But really what the research shows is if you're going to have a transition and you're going to want to, there's an elevation change, even just slight, make it contrasting.
So people are prepared.
Yeah, so they can see that there is a transition, not only in texture, but maybe a little bit in height. It might cause them to pause, but that's probably better. Actually, I know it's better than them walking over something that's maybe matching and tripping or falling.
Right.
And then in addition, one thing I'm sure Dave can definitely elaborate on as well is, we talked about senses and how they're related and really tied together. The I would say senior living community design in general is trending hard surface, and it's amazing. But in some places, it's really important, especially like in dining rooms, corridors where you're getting a lot of noise or you want to prevent noise. It's really important to think about, incorporating soft surface again in a safe way, making sure we have the proper transitions or no transitions, the right patterns, but incorporating that soft surface so that they can hear a little bit easier. Really,
the sound absorption is really important.
it is.
I agree.
We want to make sure that when our seniors and older adults are going into a dining room, they aren't completely overwhelmed by all of the sounds of the plates clattering, people talking, they can't hear anyone, and they begin to socially isolate. So that's another piece of, just application. Even though it's not directly related to vision, it is related to a sense, and that can impact how they can see.
Absolutely, because if they're overwhelmed by sound and there isn't that buffering, they will shut down. And so that makes perfect sense. How does that differ if you were going to advise somebody who's aging in place in their home? So we've talked about community and what you do in community from a flooring perspective. On the flip side, what does the research show should be happening in a residential application?
I think a lot of the findings of the research, they're really human centric and can be applied, are applicable in individual apartments.
Mhm.
I don't know, would you say the same, Brittany?
Yeah, I think it does apply. It's a little bit harder, of course, in aging in place to change your finishes. Um, but taking as much precaution as possible. Again, with those transitions, we know in residential applications, bulkier transitions, matching transitions may have been utilized. Is that something you can easily replace? Maybe you can't replace the floor, but could you replace that one area to just another visual cue to make it a little bit safer. Um, with, a lot of flooring products, if there has been a polish, like, a cleaner and a polish mix that they're very popular for people to use on their floors, you might want to strip it off. And that's an easy maintenance. Again, if you have a very glossy floor, can you look at either A, applying a matte finish, or B, if that was a gloss put on it, can you remove that to aid and make sure that if the floor is wet, they know that it's wet because it was matte and now glossy and not just
Right.
and still glossy. So there's just
That's a great point. That's a really easy fix to remove that high gloss, and it's just refinishing, not replacing flooring. There's some really
It,
great tips.
and one way, maybe, Brittany, you made me think to future proof, if you will. Initially, a floating floor might be fine, but a floating floor is not great for rolling loads and wheelchairs. And a lot of the transitions we see are because floating floors need room to expand and contract. And so that transition's there for that purpose. So maybe from a future proofing standpoint, aging in place, starting with a floor that is glued down, for example, if
Right.
you're using resilient floors, gluing it down. Now, you might not need that rolling load resistance today, but you might need it in a few years. And
Right.
so
There
that's
may
one.
be a walker,
Mhm.
not even necessarily a wheelchair, but a
Sure.
walker. And so many people all of a sudden have them, didn't think they'd ever be that person, right? But that's a really good point, the floating floor versus the fixed floor. We have talked about aging in place and designing for aging in place, both in webinars and podcasts, and we certainly do it at various speaking engagements. And there are some people who are willing to make dramatic changes to their home to stay in their home, to make it aging in place appropriate. And so for those people, an easy fix, as Brittany said, stripping the floor, making it less glossy. Are there any other things that you would recommend based on what the study has shown and what you've learned through that?
unfortunately, I'm going to say remove any bulky rugs.
Yeah, I was thinking rugs too.
Or make sure there is some sort of transition around it. There are some available like reducers, so it can minimize that trip hazard.
Okay, tell us what a reducer is for people who don't know.
Yeah, sorry. It is usually a transition piece that can help create a more gradual slope from a higher or more raised product, in this case being the rug, down to the existing flooring
Okay.
beneath it. So, instead, if you are getting to fully redo, and you do love a mix of soft and hard surface, ideally you can, inset. So you're installing them together. You have your carpet inset within your hard surface to create um, that same visual and aesthetic appeal without that tripping hazard of a rug edge.
That's a
Um,
great idea.
that's the biggest one that comes to mind. Snares should be a big one. You
Right.
want to make sure your tread and your riser are different colors because that also can signal elevation. When you're going up the stair, going down the stairs, everything's still going to look similar. So if you can have a different, whether that's a reflective strip on the end or a different color stair nose or stair cap, which is just the end of your tread. So it could denote that, again, that elevation change as you're going down the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just two big ones that come to mind, Dave. I don't know if you look like you thought of another one.
That's big because sometimes people will miss a stair because they all look the same. So those are two really good tips.
And another along the lines of stairs, another multifamily trend or um, common practice is to specify the matching stair treads that match the
Right.
floor, which of course is something we don't want to do here. In senior living, we would want to create those levels of contrast. And Brittany, I want to go back to the area rug discussion. I was chatting with one of our hospitality partners just the other week about the benefits of doing a carpet inset, and I had never really considered the fact that if you put a rug down, you had to pay to put the flooring under the rug, right? But if you plan on doing an inset, you're saving money on the flooring that would have otherwise been under the rug. So there's some cost savings to be had there. So by doing that inset, you're not only giving a flush transition across that introduction of soft surface, but you're also saving the cost of putting hard surface flooring in that area. And the inset can always be filled back in with another hard surface or resilient product if tastes or preferences change in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine there would be questions as to what would be the preferred carpet to do an inset. Would it be a carpet tile or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I have a special place in my heart for carpet tile because of how easy it is to replace. I've had the pleasure of installing them both, and I have massive respect for people who install glue down broadloom. It's not that easy, even stretch in broadloom carpet. It's tough to install, and it's nearly impossible to repair without making it look like it was repaired. So either or would work in an
Mhm.
inset situation. I think carpet tile is a more flexible option.
Right. That makes sense. Um, I think we're close to time here, and I have a question that I think is an interesting one. About human systems perspectives and how are they applied to create more inclusive environments for our seniors and aging population?
That's a great question to wrap up on. The study was done really focusing on the changes of our eyes and flooring, but the systems approach encourage us to consider other parts of the built environment, lighting, for example. One of the important things is for us to have continuous lighting because non-continuous lighting will create a lot of shadows that remember our talk about contrast. Well, non-continuous lighting will create light contrast. So going beyond just flooring into other parts of the environment, I know one of the wonderful design practices we've seen is the use of color for wayfinding, so that certain areas or wings or floors might have some common color elements to help with orientation. I've seen designers coordinate the color of artwork and flooring or the paint color on the walls to assist again with wayfinding.
That's especially common practice in memory care units. We see a lot of that.
Yes, and the use of certain colors like blue and purple may over time look similar or even identical to us. So when using just the awareness of when you're using those colors for wayfinding, to maybe avoid using colors that over time may appear similar.
So maybe even though we love blues going into green, that we go outside of that blue-green family so that we have very definite separation of colors, wings, floors, what have you.
And, I have seen some trends of even, because we know that the color begins to blend, adding in objects. Like now I'm on the sea floor. So this is a theme around the ocean. And then we're
Right.
the green floor, even though the color may seem similar, maybe it looks more like a field or a meadow or a forest. So there's the different themes that go along with the color that can really help them, again, identify where they are within the space.
I think there's just so much great information in the study. I really encourage people to read the white paper. It is not that long, but it is chock full of really good information. And the research bears out a lot of what we have thought for a long time and also dispels a lot of what we thought for a long time. So it's well worth a read, and it's a great learning opportunity. I'm so glad that Shaw was able to tap the UGA folks, and particularly the school around gerontology. That's who we want to hear from, and that's who we're serving. And so we're really excited you did that. I know it took several years in the making, and I think it's going to be a valuable resource for everybody who's involved in senior living and in the aging adult population. Dave and Brittany, thank you so much for joining us on ALC Chats. Please make sure that you look at other podcasts or listen to other podcasts that we have. We are on YouTube, and we also can be found at the agelesslivingcollaborative.org website. And we hope to see you back soon. Thanks
Thank
again.
thank you for having us, Phoebe.